Good. Uh, yeah, thank you for joining again.
Yeah, I think today
Yes.
it's gonna be very stable. I can see even the picture quality is perfect. So
Yeah,
so I think
I'm
it should be
glad.
fine.
Thank you. Um, yeah, basically because yesterday we got cut off, I was hoping that we could just do maybe about half of what we were doing yesterday, and then we'll
Yeah.
piece together what it
And
is. Yeah, if that sounds good with you.
any
How's your time right now?
anyways, I'm fine. I mean, we could redo everything if you want it to be flowing. Maybe you can just combine everything later on.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm okay with anything.
I think where the last question we really stopped off was if we want to get right into it, was talking about youth-led initiatives and community building efforts, how these
Yeah.
things strengthen the
I
future of
I think
China-Africa
we
relations.
didn't talk about the policies and stuff, right?
Mm.
The investment in the Chinese investment in Africa. Oh, we
Yeah,
haven't
we
yet
we didn't
talked
we
about
didn't
that.
talk about that. We were going to talk about
Okay,
kind of just the community-led stuff and youth-led stuff as
okay,
as a precursor to the official policies that are in place to facilitate that cultural trade.
okay. Oh, then then
Mhm.
then I think if you think just continuing from where we stopped is fine, then we can do that.
Yeah, yeah. This is very quick, just to get a little bit used to speaking and things, and then we can go into the other questions. It should be like 30, 40 minutes. Cool.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So, as you were talking about yesterday, these kind of student-led initiatives, how do you think, what do they represent for the future of China-Africa relations?
When it comes to student-led initiative or maybe youth-led initiatives, I think I've taken part in quite a couple of them. Some being like my own small initiatives that I started on my own. As I introduced before that, I kind of created a platform that I called the Abroad Path Leaders. That was in 2019, and the idea was very simple. I wanted to create a space for, uh, you know, young people who are here studying in Hangzhou to get along with the local society, to integrate into the local society, and that comes with them trying to understand what is actually happening here, getting to know China better, and in the process that is actually fostering cultural exchanges. And so that platform kind of gave me a lot of opportunities to later now organizing what I was introducing to you, the exchange of Zimbabwean and Chinese young scholars. And it also later on transformed into a very big initiative that has been spearheaded by this professor from Tsinghua University, the Harare Forum for Africa, which I think from there it kind of gave me some hope that these little initiatives that we are trying to push as young people could really also be of great importance as far as pushing um, and fostering the communication between both sides. I actually have in my circles a couple of friends who have also led their own initiatives. I have one of my friends from Cameroon, who is based in Beijing. He started what he called the China Africa Youth Federation, which was a platform that had, I would say, some young, influential young academicians, young scholars who are studying in China, and some young journalists as well, and and as well as some Chinese young people on the platform. So it has been, um, doing some great stuff there. I've participated in a couple of activities in which I'm invited either by some Chinese uh, young people or some African young people who are trying to foster China-Africa cultural exchanges through their own small and little initiatives. And I was glad last year that I got invited by one of my Chinese friends, and she's based in Africa. She's doing her research on art there.
Mm.
So she and her friends, they've started a podcast, and on that podcast they're talking about African issues. It's either about how Chinese people who are based in Africa view Africa, and also how African young people based in China view China. And it was quite very interesting. So they invited me to that podcast. I was asking some questions like, tell us, how has been your journey in China, and how do you envision these China-Africa relations, cooperation? From a youth perspective.
Mm.
So what I see is that all these youth-led initiatives, they might not look like something big when you look at them from a very narrow perspective, right? Eric is just doing what he's doing. It doesn't count. It's just Eric himself. But if
Mhm.
we have 100 Erics doing something like that, then it becomes big. So I think youth-led initiatives, their impact comes when they come in numbers. So it should be um, my uh, my role is one of those guys who are trying to do some things as far as youth exchanges is concerned, to also influence some of my colleagues that, guys, this is the way to go. If you have an opportunity, then just do whatever you can, because we are the ones who are on the ground. And
Yeah.
as they always say that young people are the future, we are the ones who are here in China. So whenever a discussion that is discussing China and Africa, then we should also be involved. There should be more youth inclusion in some of the even policy discussions that are happening, because there are some things that actually I think we can also share our own perspectives with them. So maybe starting from our own initiatives, we can easily get, noticed, and maybe somehow, no one knows that one day our
Mm.
efforts will actually be able to also contribute to even better exchanges between the two sides. Yeah.
That's really interesting, and it goes into the next question, which I'm going to ask, do you feel if African nations are adequately shaping their own narratives and outcomes with partnerships in China? For example, the
Oh,
BRI.
yes.
Do you feel like
Oh,
they're in charge of their own stories there?
oh, yes. That's a very interesting question. I think Africans, yes, we are trying. We are trying our best to be, shaping our own narratives, and we're doing that through many ways. As I've said, that we have a lot of young people out of the continent who are trying to tell their stories based on their experiences.
Mm.
But of course, there are a couple of challenges that we currently have, and that means that uh, there is actually a very big room for improvement, because what I see is that for the Chinese young people, especially when you look at those who are in the education side, academics, young scholars, because they have enough funding, they tend to excel more in actually knowing Africa more than the
Mm.
Africans do when it comes to China studies. So it's something that I discovered because I realized that whenever you have a conversation with a Chinese who has been to Africa, studied there, because we have a couple of them who are going there on exchange basis. I've had two of my very close friends who have studied Shona, which is my native language in Zimbabwe.
Oh,
Well,
really?
whenever I have a discussion with them, I mean, I got so impressed that they know a lot about Zimbabwe. And whenever I realized also something very interesting that if you would want to read a very comprehensive, I would say, a narrative on China-Africa relations and status quo. And you go right now, as we are discussing here, on Google and search for those kind of, maybe articles, be it academic ones, be it from the any platform that you may try to look for them, you may realize that we have a lot of Chinese scholars who have been taking part in most of those discussions. But I think the
Mm,
African voice is kind of low, not because anybody said, let that voice be low. No, it is because that we have not yet put enough effort to amplify the African voice and to actually amplify the African narrative as far as these relations are concerned. So you wouldn't want to come out and say, well, the narratives are unbalanced. No, that is not the fact. I think the fact is that we really have to take the China-Africa relations seriously as the continent, because the Chinese are coming in numbers on the continent. They're investing in several sectors. And we as well are coming to China to study in numbers. So
mhm.
as they are doing that, they have studies on Africa. I can tell you that they now have some institutes, right, in many universities. China Africa
Yeah,
Studies Institute, African Studies Institute, and they have area studies which focuses on several African countries. If I go on some online bookstores right now, I can find some textbooks that have been written on specific African countries. I have a book that talks about China-Zimbabwe uh, relations that was written by a Chinese scholar. I have a book
yeah.
that talks about the Zimbabwean history and contemporary studies written by Chinese scholars. But it's very difficult for me to find a textbook that talks about China that is well detailed and precise, written by a Zimbabwean scholar. And that is the case for many African countries. So that means that we have not yet, you know, uh, really taken shaping these narratives seriously, because we
Mm,
cannot depend on what the other countries are telling us that, well, what we are seeing from China is this and that and that and that and that, and we get along with that narrative. It is not the precise narrative. When it comes to BRI, what is happening on the continent? What are the benefits that we are getting from BRI? We can't be told by someone who is not on the continent that, well, BRI has done this and that. No, we are the ones on the ground. We know the benefits, we know the challenges. So we should be the ones who are shaping that narrative. So that's
yeah,
where the I think the current weakness is. So I think we need to really embrace these China-Africa relations as a huge opportunity to the continent. But then the narratives now depends on us. Now we need to dig deeper and tell our stories from our own perspectives without being told by anyone else, without using anyone's theoretical frameworks or whatever. Let's now have the African theoretical frameworks of understanding the status quo when it comes to China-African relations. So that's what I think when it comes to the issue of the narratives, as you're asking.
that's a really interesting thing to say, because I mean, an African framework for understanding in diplomacy and also in development. I think that's almost, for a lot of Western actors, that's also something that they haven't respected as much as well. And thinking strictly about China-Africa relations now in the future, what key policies or developments do you feel can happen in the continent, apart from the narrative, because the narrative needs to change. But apart from that, what are the key developments that you think are going to strengthen the relationship, or are you seeing something else?
Okay, well, there is a lot that can happen. So I was quite fascinated when I saw I think one of the journals that was trying to work on
Actually,
the
let me
experience
just
sharing
let
between
me just rephrase that very quickly. Just something,
uh,
where do you feel like these developments can align with these values, with African values? If they're not, where can they
yeah,
align?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, thanks for that question.
Hmm.
It is also a very interesting question. So just I think just last year I was looking at this journal. It was they had an edition. I forgot the name of the journal, but anyway, they had an edition in which they were trying to discuss experience sharing between China and Africa. That means that is there anything that African countries can learn from China, or maybe what can we get from the Chinese model to, when it comes to the African continent? And I think uh, well, the consensus on the papers that they got was that it's very difficult to learn from China. Well, there is no precise Chinese model and all of that. But after I read everything, I then realized that, well, there was somehow um, a lacking of what we were talking about, the African framework to actually interpreting that question. Because the reason why they reached the conclusion that there is nothing to learn is because they are using precisely the
Mm.
Western frameworks to understand and to figure out what can we get out of that. As someone who has been in China and trying to understand what really transpired as far as China's development is concerned, I got to reach to a point where I think really, if we are going to say there is one country that we can try to learn from their experiences, then it should be China.
Mm.
China, there is no single model that you can pick to say, okay, this is the model that we are now bringing to Zimbabwe.
Mhm.
Why? Because every region in China has a different way of doing. You might understand that even you try and go and dig during their raw industrialization back then in the 80s or in the late 70s, they had several models, right? If you were looking at Guangdong province, they had what they called the Dongguan model, or um, the Pure River Delta model, which was based on attracting foreign direct investment. You come to Jiangsu province, they had what they call the Sunan model, which was based on state-owned enterprises. You come here down to Zhejiang, where I'm based in, they had what they called the Wenzhou model from the city of Wenzhou, which was based on small, medium enterprises. And so now you would then realize that the same thing is happening even in today's China. Every province has a different way of doing things. So what is the main lesson that we get from China? There is one Chinese phrase that they usually say, which is called "yin di zhi yi," which means that implement according to your local conditions. So that
Mm.
means that if African countries would want to find something from China that is going to work and suit their values, well, it should be you learn and you implement according to your local conditions. It's not going to be a copy and paste. There is no package, something like a Beijing consensus or whatever. Some
Yeah.
argued it won't happen. It's not going to be there. And China, I think China is not also on the pursuit to try to impose any values on us that for things to work in Zimbabwe, you should have this, you should have that, you should. I think there is no such kind of a push from that side. So, well,
mm,
they are willing to share with us their experiences. But the important thing is that do we know what we want from China? Um, so I think that's where the question is. So there is a lot that we can gauge. And if I could start with one, maybe we could start our development from the rural areas. Uh, you
mm,
know, if you are going to ask me why for a country like Zimbabwe, in which we have more than 60% of our population staying in the rural areas, and we have much of our economic activities quite centralized in the cities and be Harare mainly and Bulawayo. The, the other provinces have nothing really much to offer. It's just uh, a kind of struggling rural economy. So, for us to improve the people's livelihoods, then maybe perhaps a Chinese model of rural industrialization could be explored. But not saying that we are going to copy what they did. No, we learn and then we try to figure out what do we have and how can we better, you know, make it work. Because I think as far as we are going to try to seek development in Africa, there are a couple of priorities that we have for all African countries. Zimbabwe, you think of Nigeria, you think of South Africa, any African country that comes into your mind. I think the first thing that we really need to chase is rural transformation. We need
mm,
structural transformation, rural transformation, because it's the same. We have a huge number of people who are staying in the rural areas, and they actually take the great percentage of our poverty. And we also need to chase urbanization, with that being said. And the other thing that we need is what I was talking about, industrialization. Of course, we need that. It's simple economics. If you want to develop, then you got to industrialize. We can't stay agrarian. I mean, now it's 21st century. Whilst others are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, I think we actually haven't gone through some of the revolution. So anyway, we have the chance to just keep the ladder and go to the fourth
mm,
industrial revolution. We are going to skip some of the, you know, the meanderings that were there. But well, it means that we are going to need that. And one of the most critical issues that we may need to solve during the process are the infrastructure gaps that we have. There is not enough infrastructure to support the industrialization policies that we are going to be having on the continent. If you would want to navigate from one end to the other, uh, it becomes very difficult. So, if we are going to have productive sectors, how are we going to reach the markets and stuff? So, let's have proper infrastructure from physical to even soft. By soft infrastructure, I mean the institutions that are going to support everything. So, with that being taken into consideration, now we also need to really make sure that we have built good investment climate to attract foreign direct investment. All of these
mm,
things, they've been done in China already. They've been done in the US. They've been done in Japan. I mean, it's something that we already know that it happens. But then what actually differs is that there are some things that I think are our comparative advantages. Then that's what we should be looking for. I really enjoy listening to some of these uh, Chinese political economy scholars whenever they're arguing about what China did correct. Well, there
mm.
is
Okay.
one very famous a scholar from Peking University. You must know him, former chief economist of the World Bank, Justin Yefulin. He argues more about the importance of the comparative advantage. So he says that China managed to benefit from its backwardness. It managed because his argument is that every developing country is in that backwardness, the state of backwardness. And that actually has its opportunities.
Mm.
But then how are you going to embrace those opportunities is what actually will make you different. So China had its comparative advantage, a huge population, low labor cost, and made use of that. And it brought to them magic. It happened. They have had growth for more than, for more than 30 something years, fast growth. So for the African continent, our comparative advantages are where in the factor endowments, we have a lot of natural resources.
Yeah.
We can't run away from them. Uh, of course, someone will say the resource case is coming for you guys. No way. That's actually our comparative advantage. We have those natural resources, then we should be focusing more on how can we best make something out of them. Because that is actually our competitive advantage. That's what we have. Can we compete with the US right now on making chips? Of course, no. Can we manufacture more stuff than China at the moment? No. What do we have? Our natural resources. What do we have? We have a very youthful population. That's number two.
Mm.
19.7 median age. More than 60% of the population is under the age of 25. Then now China is trying to move up the ladder, going to maybe the service industry. When you take a look at the global value chain. So what does that mean for us as African countries? We should be trying to tap into those industries that China is leaving behind, labor-intensive industries that require low labor costs. Let's try
Mm.
to attract those industries into the continent. Our comparative advantage is there. We cannot chase to manufacture things that are more expensive than us importing them. Then you should be fostering industries that are cheaper for you to produce those products, and that actually would foster growth on the continent. So, well, these are actually some of my immature thoughts when it comes to our status quo and what can
Well,
we really do. Yeah.
I mean, it speaks to the one of the last questions that we have is what changes or improvements would you like to see? And we've talked about urbanization and then proper industrialization and then the infrastructure gap and then comparative advantages. And so you feel that something that I think also for many policy analysts, it's been a blessing and a curse to be so resource rich because it has historically attracted investors, but not the good kind and the exploitative kind. And as the narrative grows and as the voices get louder and the demands are known, perhaps there could be a change there. Is that what you're saying? Or is that what you're hoping?
Probably. I think we shouldn't treat those natural resource-based industries as sort of backdoor economies because they are actually, I would say, the core of our economies. Because it seems that there is little transparency when it comes to those industries, right? So now there should be more transparent policies to shape those industries because they are the backbone of our economies. That's where we are getting much of our foreign currency reserves. So,
Hmm.
as we are attracting more foreign direct investment into those sectors, now there will be more and more and more attention being given to that, and that means that our policy makers would really need to make sure that they are having proper institutions that can shape even the further development of other sectors. Because I think once we really have proper institutions in place to support those natural resource based industries, then they are going
Hmm.
to promote industrialization of the continent. This is what I think. Now we are always talking about the new energy sectors, right? Development of the
Green, yeah.
lithium batteries and many other things. You realize that a significant amount of lithium reserves are there on the continent. But do we have any, framework on how we can make sure that these reserves, these resources, these natural lithium reserves, are not just being exported raw out of the continent? Maybe they could be exported as finished or semi-finished products. Then we need to make sure that in those natural resource-based industries, there is value addition happening there. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and that's where the puzzle is. I think that's what needs to be explored. Of course, there is a lot of uh, you know debating that is happening in that sector. Of course, you know in development studies, they always talk about the natural resource case. And the argument goes like, if you take a look at especially mining, it has not really benefited much of those countries that are natural resource rich.
Hmm.
And what are the reasons? It is very difficult to make sure that there is the redistribution of the income. It is just there are a lot of problems that are associated with those industries. So now the question should be, how can we then do to make sure that we arrest that problem of natural resource case? Because we know that those natural resources are our comparative advantage. So if you are telling us that they are a case, then that means that we are doomed forever. We are in this trap that we are not going to come out. Then the policy innovation should be coming to solve this puzzle. That the puzzle is there, that no single country until now has managed to develop just using minerals. We are going to make it happen on the continent. So there should be more discussions on this topic. So that's what I think.
Yeah, very interesting. So no country has ever developed just using minerals. Uh, that's a plea to diversify, and that's a plea for more developmental relationships that are healthy and respective. I like what you said earlier about 因地制宜. That was interesting because we've heard it over and over and over with different progressive kind of development funding types, develop according to local needs. But at the end of the day, if there is an infrastructure gap, how could you plug and play into a political economy that is so advanced when you're still trying to play catch up? The hand that reaches out might be too far ahead. Um, that's what I see it sometimes. Some really interesting points. I just wanted to end it by asking you one very simple question based off of your personal experience and based off of kind of your understanding of the landscape, political and economic, of Zimbabwe, China, Africa, China relations. Why do you feel that the diplomacy work that you're pursuing to do in China is worthwhile? Is there a grand scheme here that you think will unfurl? Is there something you feel is unique and different about these opportunities? Just a little bit more about that, and then we can finish up.
Well, I actually, think that this route that I'm trying to take, it actually is something that has more of young people who are into development issues, who are into diplomacy, political economy. I mean, all of those sectors can actually try to look up on. Why? We are seeing a huge number of the Chinese coming into the continent. Chinese presence on the continent is something that I mean everybody is seeing. And as you may, as you know, that I think the narrative out there and is painted as something that is actually not a positive thing. The
Mhm.
narrative that is being portrayed out there is that they are coming to loot the resources. They are coming to exploit you guys. It is more political than economic. There are many narratives that are being pushed there. But then, well, for those who are really insiders to these relations, what do they think? If the Chinese investors are not going to get onto these African countries' economies to invest, then who is going to come? As you know, that China now is the largest source of foreign direct investment on the continent in Africa. Then if all these investors are going to pull out, who is going to fill up the gap? So I think for me, it is actually very important because um, for Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe is one of the uh, I mean the beneficiaries of Chinese FDI. I think we are in actually the top 10 of those countries that are receiving much FDI from China. And interestingly, contrary to what others may think, 90% of this FDI is coming from the private sector. Coming from the private sector, not actually uh, state-owned enterprises or maybe the public sector. So there is a lot that is happening. More than 3,000 Chinese companies are operating on the continent now in many sectors. Actually, the one that leads is actually the constructing industry. About 37% of the investment on the continent is coming from. So all of these things, whenever I think about them, I feel like, well, then China is the right country to really engage with at the moment because they're doing much of the continent. It is the right country that we should be trying to understand what are the what are their intentions when they're coming to the continent? What are their strategic plans? What can we really get out of these engagements? From a youth perspective, of course, I'm quite interested in actually trying to know what do young Chinese think about the continent because they are the ones who are going to be coming in the future. So I think that the journey that I'm taking it's something for me that I feel like, well, I'm just being on the right side of the future. This is the future. By no doubt, the Chinese investment in Africa will continue to increase. This is what I just assume. Of course, there's need to make theoretical analysis on that, but I actually uh, estimate that it will continuously increase as we have seen over the past years. Since 2013, it has been as stable as that, leading um, as the largest trading partner with the whole continent. Well, I think then any engagement, be it diplomatic, be it academic, be it cultural, anything is worth it because we want to understand China more. We can't we can't relax behind and say, well, China is here. It is what it is. They know us better than we do when it comes to understanding them. You know, if you see a Chinese scholar in Zimbabwe telling you about your own history, your own economic development, your own political, social status quo, you will be shocked. And then, on the contrary, now trying to hear a Zimbabwean talking about Chinese developmental issues, then you'll be like, well, then we are in a huge trouble here because we are at different levels in terms of understanding. of each other. So for me, I am taking this as an opportunity to understand China better. And that is to my benefit and to the benefit of my fellow colleagues, as I will also be able to share my discoveries with them.
Hmm.
I think it's a journey of discovering new things and trying to make sense out of it.
That's a great point. Um, there's an investment into these countries, but then there's an investment into the culture and understanding and embedding themselves there. And you can't go to a place where you don't know, and you can't
Yes.
work in a place that you don't know, and it has to be vice versa. Um, which is a really interesting point, and I guess that makes these cultural exchange programs and it makes students that stay in China so important for the future of diplomacy, so that there is an equal footing and a mutual understanding there. It's yeah, I was talking to somebody else at one point, and he was recalling how some leaders go up to Beijing and they don't have their own interpreters. And it's like that's a fundamental power imbalance where two interpreters come from China, none from this country. Just an example, but it's a really interesting point. And hopefully, hopefully there can be a greater understanding in the future, and that these scholarships and friendship funds are expanded, so that the opportunities spread a little bit more evenly. Um, I think
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really great point to end on. And thank you so much for joining again. Uh, and sharing some
Thanks. Thanks.
insights.
Thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
definitely some very cool things said. Um, I would like to keep up with you, obviously, and see what you get up to in the next year. So I don't plan on being in China next year, but hopefully soon. And I've only been to Hangzhou once, so I'm due for another visit. So I'll let you know
Uh,
if I'm there.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still around if you happen to visit China. Uh, I mean,
So,
anyway, we keep in touch anytime.
yeah,
I'm
of course.
around. Hopefully, if everything goes well, I'll be finishing my PhD in 2027. And
Wow.
I hope that after that, I still need to spend some time here trying to really understand what is happening in China, because I think there are a lot of very interesting experiences that we could
Mm.
gather from here. I'm working with one of my friends. We are trying also to jot something down on China's poverty alleviation experiences. We have seen
Okay. Yeah.
several very interesting experiences when it comes to all of these things. So, well, during the process, I just want to accumulate more knowledge, and based on my own understanding of what is actually
Mm.
happening there. And let's keep in touch. To visit
Of
Hangzhou
course.
or
Yeah.
any other cities in China, maybe we can grab a cup of coffee or something.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just for this recording and for this video, I put it up on YouTube, long form, and then I take some bits and pieces, maybe like two or three or four kind of segments that I really liked from a conversation, then I put them on the Instagram. So I'll share all those
Okay,
details with you in the next week of just what I decide to put
okay.
up, and then you can choose whether you like it or not, and we'll go from there.
No problem, no problem. Looking
Yeah.
forward to that.
Okay. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining.
All right.
And
Okay,
yeah, have a nice evening. And I'll stay in touch.
thank you so much, Diana.